OfficialLarkenRose here, and I'm going to start with a quote. See how many of you can guess what it is before the end. Afterwards, I'll tell you what it's from. Quote, during an arrest, you think, since you aren't guilty, how can they arrest you? Why should you run away? And how can you resist right then? After all, you'll only make your situation worse. You'll make it more difficult for them to sort out the mistake. And how we burned in the camps later, thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family. Or if, during periods of mass arrests, as for example in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and at every step on the staircase, but had understood they had nothing left to lose and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand. The organs would very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt. We didn't love freedom enough. Every man always has handy a dozen glib little reasons why he is right not to sacrifice himself. End quote. That's Alexander Solzhenitsyn from Gulag Archipelago and his experience in the Soviet Union. Now, why do I bring that up? First of all, it's a cool quote. Everybody should have heard about it. And go read the whole account, the whole Gulag Archipelago. Human beings are an interesting thing. We care lots about the future, kinda, sorta. But we focus on the right now a whole lot. And psychopaths and criminals and political parasites use that to their advantage. Because if there's like a street gang or a mafia that goes around robbing people and they have a gun in your face, give me your wallet, of course you're going to think, well, if I don't, they kill me. What's the point of that? Might as well give up my wallet. And if that happens once and twice and 100 times and everybody in the neighborhood has a pattern of doing that, life gets worse. In each individual situation, it was better for that person at that moment to go along to avoid getting shot. Like the risk benefits were kind of obvious. But in the long run, it makes everything worse because you rewarded the criminal. You went along with it. You acted as easy victims and targets. And so cooperating, being nonviolent and civilized and peaceful while being victimized made everything worse because it allowed aggressors and thugs to get away with aggression and thuggery, so they keep doing it. But then there's this weird thing called time, and we look into the future and we think, well, if I don't hand over my wallet and this guy shoots me, I have no future. What we don't tend to do is say, well, what's the future like if none of us do anything about this thug? And so a really sad but profound example can be seen in reading the writings of Frederick Douglass and his firsthand account of being a slave, being treated as somebody else's property, and how many slaves in their day-to-day life, like, they weren't enjoying the situation, but they're like, well, if I cause trouble, I'll get whipped. The immediate negative reaction from, if I disobey, bad things will happen to me. What if you don't? Well, then I don't get whipped today, or tomorrow, or the next day. But you might have 60, 70 years as a slave, as the life of a slave. Would you be willing, this is like Braveheart speech just came to mind. Would you be willing to gamble a different future, a life as not a slave, to right now, right here, take that big risk to fight the overseer or try to run away or whatever. And in the moment, it's so easy to be so focused on the moment and what's scary in the moment. You're not scared of what might happen to me 30 years from now if I never resist, if I never stand up, if I never speak out, if I never do anything. If I just go along, what will life look like? Not just for me, but for everybody around me, for the country, for the world, whatever. What does the future look like if everybody's focus is always, well, I don't want the trouble. And I don't want the risk right here and right now, so I'm not going to do anything because it's too much trouble, it's too much of a risk. Why would I bother? All I have to do is not resist right now, and I'll make it till tomorrow, where the ruling class will be a little bit worse. The thugs will be a little bit worse, or even just the same amount of thuggery. They'll still be here. And they don't ever go away until somebody resists. And not just one somebody or two somebodies, but enough people to actually stop the machine, like Solzhenitsyn was talking about. And it's this interesting thing that I'm sure, lots of like low-level thugs and purse snatchers and street gangs make use of it without even really understanding it and without thinking about it. I'm sure the psychopaths that wield political power for a very long time have absolutely thought about this and studied it and realized, okay, we can very gradually, it's the boiling frog thing. You probably all know what I'm referring to. We can gradually make things worse and worse, and at no single moment will people suddenly say, now we have to resist, now we have to fight back. Because it's only a tiny bit worse than it was yesterday, and you put up with that. At what point in the here and now does it suddenly become worthwhile taking on the risk of we're going to openly disobey those in authority and those with power? So people put up with it and put up with it and put up with it and put up with it. In fact, the Declaration of Independence starts by describing this. I forget the actual quote, but it basically says, yeah, humanity has this tendency of putting up with unjust crap for way longer than they should, rather than putting everything at risk and trying to fundamentally change things. Because as individuals, each one of us is sort of in our own little life and thinking, well, I don't want to risk this. Why, I have this pretty dang easy life, all things considered. Why would I risk all of that for this? And in the long term, massive numbers of people lose all of that because they didn't resist. And Gulag Archipelago gives a firsthand real-world example of that. And I know some of you didn't recognize the quote until I got to the line, and how we burned in the camps later. Like you're sitting in Stalin's gulag going, why didn't we resist somewhere before being here? Why didn't we do something about this? But people think in the moment so much, and tyrants know they can use that, and they can exploit that, and torment you a little bit more, and tax you a little bit more, and regulate you a little bit more, and monitor you a little bit more, and you'll probably let them get away with it. And a thing I've said before, I'll throw this out there again, I think the main job of the U.S. court system has nothing to do with what they pretend it's for. It's not to make the feds comply with the Constitution. The feds don't comply with the Constitution at all in any way, shape, or form. It's basically to act as a pretend check and balance to stop the people from just violently overthrowing the government. In other words, okay, if we let you get away with doing that, that might trigger a backlash that actually threatens the power of the machine. So we're going to sort of half the time pretend and half the time actually make rulings that kind of slow down the march towards tyranny enough that people can still have faith in the judicial system and elections and this as gradually they get stomped on more and more, as long as there's no single point, single moment when they feel like this is it, this is the line, this is where I disobey and resist. Because when a bunch of people do that, no empire can continue. Like, it doesn't even matter how well armed they are. If people decide, this is my line, I'm not putting up with this, it's time to actually disobey and resist. And I don't mean complain at the ruling class with a protest or vote for a new master. I mean disobey and resist. And that is the only thing those in power fear. It's not elections, it's not petitions, it's not any of that. The only thing they fear is the human livestock disobeying and resisting. Because they absolutely view you as livestock. You're just cattle to them. They treat you like cattle. They exploit you for all you're worth every chance they get. But if the farmer is outnumbered by a bunch of angry cows, if the day comes that the cows go, yeah, let's, hey, he brings us food and he does this and he does, let's run him over. Like, then the farmer's in trouble because he's going to be outnumbered. But the way most people's brains work, including mine, I'm not pretending to be immune from this. There's the immediate thing of, well, right now I could have a whole bunch of trouble or none. Like Solzhenitsyn was describing. Like, well, if they're there and I didn't do anything wrong, they're there to arrest me, I should probably just go along. And because, like, why would I resist? I didn't do anything wrong. And I mean, that would just make things worse for me. I've read similar accounts happening in Nazi Germany where people are like, well, this must just be a mistake. Just go along with them and explain what happened and they'll figure out they did something wrong or something. And people hoping for the best, like, I'm going to cooperate so as to not cause trouble. And they don't get that the aggressor caused trouble. The guy who came to kidnap you, he caused the trouble. And you deciding when and how and whether to resist may have one outcome short term, might be good, might be bad, but long term, failure to resist and failure to disobey, everybody going along with it, will absolutely make everything get worse. And there's a Frederick Douglass quote about that. Find out exactly the amount of injustice and wrong that people will put up with, and you've found the exact amount which will be imposed on them. And now I'm paraphrasing, and that'll keep happening until they resist, with either words or blows or both, which is the way he put it. I would say, well, it has to be like open physical disobedience and maybe even forcible resistance, because words they don't even care about. The only good of words is getting other people to go, yeah, we should disobey. So, and this is the entire reason for democracy, the entire reason for the court system, the entire reason they brought in the Trump clown to add to the circus was to keep people focused on a political solution, which there never is, there never has been, there never will be, there never can be. You don't ever get to freedom by way of arguing who your master should be. Because if you argue who your master should be, you get a master. That's not freedom. But if they can keep people's attention and focus and energy on the political system and elections and whining at each other and having different legislative agendas and all that garbage, as long as people aren't disobeying and resisting, the people in power know they have nothing to fear. And it's so much easier for the average person to say, well, I'm going to vote, like nobody locks me up or shoots me for voting, or I'm going to say something, I'm going to object to this, I'm going to go to a protest, I'm going to do something that doesn't put any risk on me, but it expresses my frustration. Okay, do you get how that is allowed in part so that you release the anger and you have an outlet for it that accomplishes nothing? By the way, Jones Plantation novel talks about this. Mr. Smith explains, if you give them an outlet for them to like get all righteously indignant and go and release their energy and then exhausted and then they lose and then they crawl back into their cage, that is much better than, for the tyrant, I mean, that's much better than bottling it up until the people go, this is too bad, no, we're going to resist now. We're going to disobey and resist. Maybe nasty, maybe quietly, maybe behind their backs, maybe right in their face, whatever, but we're not going to obey the rulers anymore. That is the only thing ruling classes ever fear. It's not your opinion, it's not your vote, it's not your petitions, it's not your protests. It's will you obey them? If the answer is yes, they don't give a crap about anything else you have to say or what you think or what you do. As long as you obey like good little human livestock, they don't care. Which is why they put so much effort into being terrorists, like the IRS, which is a terrorist organization by definition. You might be thinking, oh, you're being extreme. What does it do? It scares people. The IRS is designed, all what it does, everything you hear about it, what gets reported about it is all scary bad things will happen to you if you don't give us money. Tell me that isn't what the IRS does on purpose. Can anybody with a straight face say that they don't use fear and terror and stress to compel lots and lots of people to hand over money to the ruling class? That's the definition of terrorism, is using force and the threat of violence to serve a political agenda. That's exactly what the IRS is. That's all they are. That's all they do. And each individual person thinks, well, I don't dare to resist. They might take my house. They might arrest me. Who knows what they're going to do. So I better go along. And the tax rates go up. And new taxes appear. Now there's tariffs on anything from over there. Now there's taxes over here and this, that. And they're robbing you as much as they can possibly get away with. And each person on any given day is right to say, well, I make a big risk to myself to openly resist at that particular moment. But at the same time, the risk to everybody overall when nobody resists is way worse. As this guy was pondering while in Stalin's gulags, figuring out, yeah, we probably should have done something before this. If the moment the feds had tried to do an income tax, there was one in 1861 and then it died for a minute and came back in 1913. But don't worry, it's a tiny little percentage and it's only on the richest people. So most of you livestock, you're not going to get robbed by this tax. So you should be fine. You should cheer because we're robbing the rich. Sound familiar? So you should cheer for the ruling class robbing those people that you're envious of, because that's good. Yeah, be happy about them being robbed. And then, the income threshold is coming down. Now more people owe it, and the tax percentages are going up. Oh, it's only temporary. It's only for the war. It's a temporary funding thing for World War I. Didn't that kind of end at some point? Oh, well, then it was temporary 1939 Income Tax Act, which jumped tax rates and stuff. But we need that in case World War II, which kind of thought that ended too, but the tax didn't. Go figure. So at every single step of the way, where in a normal person's life, where would the line suddenly be? Oh, you're taking away my business deduction for the paper cups I buy for the picnic? Well, that's the final straw. Here is where I take my stand. Like, there isn't one. The reason they do the march in tiny little steps is because which of those steps is going to make the average person go from comply and pay up and do as you're told to nope, screw you, I'm all the way going to disobey? Almost none of them, which is why they do the boiling frog routine and why people put up now with a level of robbery and extortion and intrusion and surveillance way beyond anything King George III ever dreamed of. People go rah about the American Revolution. It was like a few percentage tax on tea and paper, pieces of paper. Literally, the Stamp Act. It's like, they had a revolution. I mean, the revolution wasn't just about that, but they were mad about that. Like that puny little thing. And now you have taxes everywhere. But if you get there in tiny little increments, the vast majority of people living their little individual life, they're not going to say, oh, the tax rates went up from 21.3% to 22.7%. Torches and pitchforks. It's not how people are. And they don't think in terms of principles. Because if the Fed, I guarantee if the Feds went from we don't have an income tax to jumping where we are now, okay, we're just going to tax the crap out of all of you, a huge percentage of what you've been earning, which you've been keeping up till right now. We're going to do all of this right now. There would immediately be a revolution. It would never be enforced at all. Nobody would even dare to work for whatever enforcement agency was supposed to collect that, because they'd know, okay, I can join up, make a paycheck, immediately get killed because you're pissing off like 100 million or 200 million armed Americans. I'm not going to do that. They're not used to that. They're not accustomed to being robbed. So suddenly bringing in the whole thing, there would absolutely be a very nasty, very quick backlash. So why isn't there now? Because we got here in tiny little steps, and all those human beings are like, well, that step isn't going to make me resistant. This step isn't going to make me resistant. That step. For the past 100 frickin' years, tiny little steps, more intrusion, more surveillance, less freedom, more tentacles, more regulations, and everything you can possibly think of to do. And at no point does it seem like, well, that was the last straw, because it was so tiny, and we have so much to lose. And that's another part of the game that Mr. Smith explains in Jones Plantation, the novel. You actually want your livestock to have something to lose. Because if they have nothing to lose, if they're starving and desperate, then at the drop of a hat, they overthrow you and kill you and take your stuff. But if they have a relatively comfortable life, and they know it could be much worse, well, then we'll go along and we'll do what the master says, and we'll avoid being whipped, and we'll do that. Because we're so comparative. Well, yesterday and then tomorrow, what we don't do is say, what do I want my life and my children's life to look like in 20, 30 years? And is there going to be some point between now and then when it suddenly becomes better and more useful to resist? There's a Patrick Henry quote. Lots of quotes are diving into my head today. The speech that ends in "Give me liberty or give me death," that whole speech is awesome. And part of what it says is like, when do you think we're going to be in a better position to resist? When there's like soldiers everywhere and there's tax collectors everywhere, and like, what are we waiting for? We know we don't like this. We know this is wrong. We know this is unjust. If you're not going to disobey now, when are you? Like, what day is there suddenly going to be something different that you will disobey? And I mean, if he could see modern Americans, Patrick Henry would be pulling his hair out and go, they steal that much of what you produce? Like a huge percentage of what the vast majority of people produce, the government just steals it by income taxes and employment taxes and then sales taxes when you spend it and all that stuff. And he would say, you let it get all the way to there? Yeah, because it was in tiny little steps. And because people don't think in principles, they think in right here and now, what's the comfortable choice? What's the risk and benefit right now if I resist arrest from this guy? Or if I refuse to pay this thing? The risk is too scary. And that's how a tiny number, relatively speaking, of sociopaths can keep a huge horde of human livestock paying tribute to these evil bastards. Because each one is thinking of his own little life and thinking, well, it'll cause trouble if I disobey and resist right now. You know what will cause way, way more trouble for you and your children and their children and the whole freaking world? Is if you never resist. And people decide how they're going to disobey and resist. Again, some do it quietly and like, well, I'm going to sabotage this, or I'm going to just work under the table and not report it and not pay taxes on it. Or, bluntly, forcibly resisting. Like when the ICE Nazis show up to haul somebody away for not having the right paperwork, we're going to chase them away. That's a different way to resist. And as always, it depends how many people are doing it. Whether the resistance is going to end well. Bundy Ranch was a fine example. A bunch of people showed up at the bridge with guns and said, yeah, we're not going to let you do this to them. And the feds had to back off because they're like, yeah, okay, right now we can't push it through brute force. Even if we did just like wipe out everybody here, there's going to be 3 million more the next day. And there would have been, and I would have been one of them. And they know it. So the people in power, have to back off. But this weird aspect of human psychology that we're so focused on the here and now, because that's the immediate reality we're faced with, and we don't look at the long term and like, what are we leaving to our kids? That our kids are going to be basically human livestock for psychopaths. When is it going to be a better time to disobey and resist? In whatever way and to whatever degree you decide to. Like, it doesn't... There's lots of people who resist passively and quietly and just, do under the radar and I'm off grid. You know, whatever it is. And you also decide whether to resist at all, whether to disobey at all. But if you look at any given situation and you compare it not to what was yesterday, but to what reality could be, what life could be, how bad does it have to get before you will disobey or resist? Or can it get all the way to step into this cage, you're now a slave, and you still won't resist as long as they get there in tiny steps? And sadly, that describes most people. Most people will all the way walk into the cage if the ruling class gets them there in little tiny steps, each one of which seems too trivial to, we're not going to suddenly throw away everything I have and resist for that tiny little step, that tiny little change, that tiny little slightly worse thing. And so people will accept and cooperate with a completely heinous situation, which if it was sprung on them all at once, they would absolutely have resisted, but they got there really slowly, so it worked. And most people do not have the mentality that I believe it was Thomas Paine expressed when he said, "If there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace."